Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new Ace in a Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the Aeronautica Mach-E C.202EC, an Italian fighter aircraft going to tier of 2 and a battle rating of 3.0. Having already provided a general overview to the history behind the C.202 Folgore, which may be seen as part of our C.202 review, link available in the top right corner of your screen as displayed now, today's history is going to focus specifically on this variant of the C.202. With that, we begin thus. Throughout its combat service in 1942, the C.202's impressive performance and manoeuvrability were undermined by its poor armament. The combination of two 12.7mm Breda-SAFAT machine guns in the engine cowling and two 7.7mm Breda-SAFAT machine guns in the wings was seen as well behind the contemporaries at the time, which were filled in heavy caliber machine guns or a combination of machine gun and cannon. Therefore, in an attempt to improve the plane's firepower, one C.202 airframe, serial number MM91974, was fitted with a pair of gondola-mounted Mauser 20mm MG151 Cannon as supplied from Germany. This plane, unofficially designated C.202EC, EC standing for Esperimento Cannoni, literally translating as Cannon Experiment, flew for the first time on the 12th of May 1943, and the test trials of this initial prototype and 4 further prototypes highlighted that it was a trade-off with the new armament configuration. Whilst the firepower improved significantly, the increased mass of the cannon compromised the plane's overall performance. Therefore, with this, it was decided that development of the C.202EC would not continue due to the weakened performance of the aircraft as a whole. Instead, the work done on the C.202EC was fed into the development of the C.205V, which was the eventual successor to the C.202, whereby it was intended that the C.205 would be able to mount the 20mm cannon within either the nose or the wings. This was to come to fruition with the C.205V Series 3 in the latter half of 1943, where the plane swapped out the two wing-mounted 7.7mm Breda-SAFAT machine guns in the wings for two 20mm MG151 Cannon. And so with the conclusion of our historical overview, let's see how the C.202EC handles in the skies of War Thunder Arcade. Today's gameplay is brought to you from the ground strike map Two Towns. For this will be used in the following setup. Stealth belts are 12.7mm machine guns, the logic here being that in our experience the stealth belts are proven to be the most effective on the whole, at dealing damage and setting fire to foes. For our 20mm cannon we are using the air target belts, as these have proven to be the most effective with a large concentration of high explosive incendiary mine and Geschoss shells. Our gun convergence is set to 500 meters, whereby this only affects our 20mm cannon as mounted under the wings, and whilst our preferred playstyle is boom and zoom, which works well with 500 meter gun convergence, we also have to consider this gun convergence works well in turn fights from time to time, as we're going to see over the course of this gameplay. As due to the heavier handling nature of this plane below 300 km now, we will find that our foes drift out to distances of 350 to 550 meters in the midst of a turn fight, and as we get a clean shot on them, they'll be within our gun convergence and right for the taking. As for our fuel load, we are taking the standard 30-minute fuel load to ensure we can make it to the end of the game, unscathed on fuel capacity. We begin then by talking about the C.202's climb rate, whereby the climb rate of this EC variant is rather good at its battle rating, although you do still have to feel as though you're falling behind your opposition, particularly when you're in a battle rating 3.7 to 4.0 game. Not by a huge margin when you're going up against the likes of the Spitfire Mark IIB, the P63A10 King Cobra and the Messerschmitt 19F4, but in the race to 5,000 meters altitude you'll find that you'll have a deficit between 500 to 750 meters on average in my experience. And you can get around this by being confrontational, whereby if you prefer to go head to head you can use the 700 and 800 meter gun convergence setting to do so. Alternatively, you can provide a lure using your airframe to bait foes out into a 1 versus 1 away from the centre of the map and take them on in that regard. And we're going to do so here against the Spitfire Mark IIB, making sure they cannot catch up with us too quickly by using our average dive speed acceleration, which matches the like of the Spitfire. And keep in mind that your top speed in a dive is 894 km an hour, which is nothing to shout home about, with a good number of planes at your battle rating exceeding 900 km an hour in a dive, none more so than the P-47D Thunderbolt. We come around here quite close on the Spitfire Mark IIB, deciding to turn above them rather than the level plane with them to make sure they cannot use the superior turn circle to their advantage. Instead we come down right on their 6 and bled off a good amount of energy to do so. And as we continue to open fire, we've got the Spitfire Mark IIB in our sights, we just need to finish them off, and with one clean shot, that's them out of the game. Your turn circle in this plane is comparable to the likes of the Yakovlev Yak-1 or the D520, so it's average at best, As we go head to head with the Sea Hurricane Mark 1 here, thinking it was going to be a Mark 1C, which would rip us to pieces with its 21mm cannon, we dive away from the Mark 1B, noting that we cannot outturn them simply because they've got the tighter turn circle by a huge margin, but we have the energy retention over the short distance in the vertical to slingshot up onto their 6 and catch them by surprise here. They were not expecting this by the looks of things. But their airframe holds up to our 20mm cannon fire, which was a little bit off target, and we continue to pepper their airframe, keeping on their 6 here due to our decent manoeuvrability. And as we go into loop, we can see that our loop circle is rather good and almost comparable to the likes of the Hurricane there. We catch them out here as they thought they were going to be right on their 6, but instead we broke out to the side to make them think we've broken off instead. And as we come around, we've got a clean shot on them, having eliminated their elevator, and that's the Sea Hurricane Mark 1B out of the match. It's at this point that we'll go for a reload, but note how despite wasting a lot of ammunition in those 2-turn fight engagements, we've still got 158 cannon rounds available. That's because you have 250 rounds per cannon, which means that reloads are going to be infrequent. Instead, if you're rather accurate with your fire, you may find yourself going an entire game without needing a reload, particularly if you decide to engage enemy fighters over the course of multiple boom and zoom runs when they least expect you, compared to trying to shred an enemy bomber from the rear over time, which will require typically more ammunition expended to do so. But with our reload underway and almost complete now, what we can see is how we're caught in a bit of an altitude trap in this plane. Now let me explain a little bit further. One of the key downsides of this plane for the opposition it goes up against is that it sits within a very limited ideal altitude range in my opinion, between 2,500 to 4,500 metres altitude. That's because below 2,000 metres altitude the engine performance of this plane, and particularly its climb rate, drops off dramatically, and above 5,000 metres altitude the engine performance drops off once again in terms of overall climb rate, overall speed and ability to regain speed, and your control surfaces also begin to become very heavy, above 5,500 metres altitude in particular. This means that unless you operate within a 2,000 to 5,000 metre altitude window, which is why I give the ideal altitude range of 2,500 to 4,500 so you've got a little bit of leeway, you will be playing against the performance of your plane, not with the performance of the plane. Whereas other planes you'll start to face will excel at much higher altitudes, or alternatively at much lower altitudes, or even in that middle ground, which means that you're in a very finite zone to operate in. Now, having taken out the P400 there, we decide to now frustrate the gunfire of a Yak 1 climbing up towards us, using our very powerful rudder and our very powerful roll rate in turn together in order to make sure they can never get a clean shot on us as we swing down for another kill. And this is where we come on to the overall control surfaces of this plane, the strongest being your ailerons, i.e. your roll rate, having one of the highest roll rates at your batter rating comparable to the likes of the P47 Thunderbolt. You'll be able to conduct multiple rolls very quickly, and what you'll find is in a scissor engagement you'll be the one with the upper hand. Even against the likes of say an I-16 Type 27 you can match their roll rate very well. However, as you go to higher speeds in a boom and zoom pass, you'll find that your roll rate begins to lock up rather gradually, whereby between 575 to 825 km an hour you will lose 75% of your roll rate, and it's showing here, whereby we're pursuing 2 Corsairs and a Spitfire on a linear path, and we're trying to keep the boom and zoom pass as linear as possible until our opponents start to divert off course. Taking out one Corsair very quickly and trying to follow through on the Spitfire at first, which was the mistake. We should have followed through on the Corsair, but fortunately for us, with the responsiveness of our elevator retained, we catch them out for a double strike. At this point then we'll come onto the rudder, which is almost as strong as your roll rate, falling only behind the likes of say an A6720 in overall performance in terms of flat turns, and what you'll find with your rudder is that you retain it until you get to 600 km an hour, whereby you'll lose 25% of its performance once you get to 650, and then there's a dramatic shift whereby you lose an extra 50% of its performance, so 75% on the whole, when you get to 750 km an hour. Finally, coming onto your weakest control surface, that is your elevator, it's only weak in the regard that it takes a bit of time to respond to initial input. It's a rather heavy control surface, but once you've got that initial input it can feel rather wonderful to use. As we saw earlier against the Sea Hurricane Mark 1B, we're able to loop quite closely with them. You'll find that between 600 and 700 km an hour you will lose 25% of your elevator's performance, which is why we're able to follow that second Corsair in our boom and zoom pass earlier on. Now, having talked about our control surfaces and our turn circle earlier, what are the other things to note about overall manoeuvrability? Well, your ideal speed range is between 375 and 550 km an hour in my experience. No higher than 550 because you start to experience your lock-up thresholds as you go to higher speeds, and if you start going below 300 km an hour in particular, the control surfaces of this plane become rather heavy to respond, particularly in terms of the elevator. Now I say that because once you start going below 300 km an hour, the elevator becomes heavy to the point that performing manoeuvres such as the basic loop becomes a very long and tedious process. meaning you're quite vulnerable to being shot at, which is where you'll need to use your rudder in order to shake off those who are underneath you and trying to climb up to catch you mid-stall, for example. And that brings us on to the point of our stall speed, which is rather high, 160 km an hour, although your stall effects start to come in at approximately 200 km an hour. In terms of stall recovery, it's a long process, whereby your plane will need to get up to a speed of 200 km an hour before you're able to start controlling it properly once again, but ideally you want to let your speed get above 250 km an hour, otherwise you're at risk of going into a secondary stall. Now you can make up for this by the fact you've got very powerful straight line acceleration, whereby from your stall speed all the way up to 400 km an hour you accelerate very well, and if you add war emergency power onto this, you'll go up to 500 km an hour in the same fashion, meaning you can gain a lot of speed and be back in the fight. But one thing we haven't talked about, and one of the key weaknesses of this plane, as you may have noticed over the course of this match, is its very poor durability. Now the only damage we've taken so far is from 7.7mm caliber machine guns, and what we've seen is we've taken considerable damage to our elevator control surface, to the wings of this plane, and also to the central fuselage, particularly around the cockpit. And we're also experiencing a very long duration fuel leak, which is costing us a lot of fuel, and if we were not using the 30-minute fuel load but rather the minimum, which is approximately 20 minutes from what I can remember, we would be down to roughly 15 minutes of fuel at this point, based on an estimated calculation. That means in general you need to be worried about being hit in this aircraft, and as you'll see against this Dauntless here, we decided to avoid the head-on, even though we could probably win it with our 20mm cannon, as they've got the nose mounted 12.7mm machine guns, as hits from heavy caliber machine gun armament or higher caliber going into cannon are absolutely fatal to this plane. As we come around on the split S rudder turn here, what we'll see is we can get a clean shot on the Dauntless and rip them out of the sky before they're able to get away. Therefore getting hit is not advised, and when you do get hit, be prepared for the worst, particularly if your fuel tanks catching fire on a regular basis, or alternatively just leaking continuously as we're seeing here. Although one odd thing about the durability of this plane, there's one very durable bit of this aircraft, and that is its engine. It seems to be the very last thing that will take damage above all else, meaning that you never have to worry about your engine dying unless this plane is literally shredded to pieces, at which point it starts to take damage. Even with a blackened engine cowling, sometimes I've not taken any damage in subsequent passes from my foes to my engine. Instead I've taken hits to the wings, I've taken hits to the central fuselage, but not the engine until the very last breath. When it does take damage to the engine, it falls apart in performance very rapidly. So with that covered, what else is there to note? Well, the one thing about this plane is that when you compare it to the base C.202, you'll find that you really have got that detrimental compromise of taking better armament but at the cost of weaker overall performance and manoeuvrability. Now if you're used to the C.202, this will become more noticeable to you, but if you were not flying it because you weren't too keen on the armament, then the C.202EC is going to be very refreshing. As we can see here against the P-38E in the head-on, we snap right out the way at their incoming fire. We're not at a disadvantage because of our increased armament, it just feels a little bit heavier to control. And again, with the Hurricane Mark IIB trying to catch us as they go into a stall with their spray fire here, we're able to dance over the top of the incoming fire. And in terms of choices here, I know that my dive speed acceleration is stronger than the Hurricanes, but weaker than the Lightning, so I decided to go for the faster accelerating target in the dive, that being the Lightning, get them out of the way, and then run for it, because I know in engagements at such low speeds and in the vertical, that Hurricane is going to have me for dead if they continue to follow my 6 and I go up once more. Well, there's a very high chance of it because of my poor durability, so instead diving away, we live to fight another day, and that's the end of the game. Time for the post-game stats. With our 9 kills, we're able to pick up 26,005 Silver Lions and 3,336 research points. To defeat the C.202EC in a given matchup then, I can recommend one overall principle, and that is where possible to try and force this plane to speeds below 300 km an hour. As soon as this plane starts going below 300 km an hour and towards its stall speed of 160 km an hour, the heaviness of this plane starts to come into major effect, whereby the increased mass conferred by the 20mm cannon becomes noticeable, and the control surfaces start to lose their overall responsiveness, particularly the elevator. In a turn fight, this means that even if you're in a plane with a slightly weaker turn circle, the C.202EC pilot will start to have to fight against their plane to be able to point their nose towards your 6, and in turn this gives you more time to come around on their 6. Alternatively, if you're being pursued by one of these in the vertical, i.e. it's climbing up towards you, what you'll find is that over time, the C.202EC pilot will struggle to follow you in the skies when you try to rudder over the top of them, i.e. commit a flat rudder turn, and therefore the C.202EC pilot will stall out rather rapidly and be a sitting duck for your gun sight. And remember, whilst this plane does have decent energy retention in both the horizontal and the vertical, over time, this energy retention becomes poorer and poorer as this plane goes to lower speeds. It really does need to be in its ideal speed range of that 375 to 550 km an hour or above this speed range to get the most out of the control surfaces in general. This is not a slow speed fighter. If anything, it prefers speed as its advocation for being able to go into a dogfight. But by avoiding such circumstances today, or controlling the situations in which we went to lower speeds, i.e. below 300 km an hour, hopefully we've demonstrated how the C.202EC is an incredibly versatile fighter, and it carries on from the C.202 in being a fighter that excels in terms of overall manoeuvrability and performance, but this time it has the additional firepower. Of course, this has come at a cost at the overall purity of the manoeuvrability and performance of the C.202, but then again, seeing as in the C.202 we found ourselves complaining constantly about the firepower, and this time we find ourselves enjoying the renewed firepower, albeit with a slight drop in performance, can we really complain? If anything, this has been an absolutely excellent experiment and a plane that's well worth flying. And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.